The HOA cops sank my boat because I refused to move it. It was the middle of the night when I watched my security camera feed and saw them cutting the lines, pulling the plugs, and then speeding off as my boat started taking on water. They thought they were so clever, sending me a 72-hour removal notice and then taking matters into their own hands. But what these fake badge-wearing bullies didn't realize was that a retired Navy engineer always has a backup plan and always documents everything. They thought the boat was gone for good, but they left behind a paper trail that was about to make them sink. How do you turn a 90-0 sunken boat into a 24 million lesson in consequences? Let me show you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because this is how you make an HOA pay. The air over the lake that morning had the kind of stillness that feels like a promise. It was just after dawn, maybe 6:15 a.m., and the water was a flat sheet of dark glass reflecting the pale pink sky. This was why I'd bought the place. After 30 years as a Navy engineer, surrounded by the constant hum of machinery and the rigid lines of a ship, this little slice of quiet felt like coming home. I'd poured my coffee, stepped out onto the deck, and was just taking that first perfect sip when I saw it. A piece of paper, bright white and offensively official looking, was taped to the windshield of my boat, the Sea Dragon. It was a classic 22-foot runabout. Nothing fancy, but I'd restored it myself, and it sat perfectly in its slip, just as my predecessor's boat had for 20 years before me. I walked down the dock, the wood cool and damp under my bare feet, a knot of irritation tightening in my gut. I already knew what this was about. I peeled the tape off the glass. The paper was thick, embossed with the community's soaring eagle logo. The words were laser-printed, cold and impersonal. Official notice of violation. Below that, it spelled it out. Non-compliant docking. Watercraft must be removed from common area slip within 72 hours of this notice. Common area? This slip had been deeded with my property, grandfathered in by the previous owner with paperwork signed, sealed, and filed with the county. I'd made sure of that before I even signed the mortgage. As I stood there, rereading the absurd notice, a movement caught my eye. Across the small cove, a pontoon boat, with HOA security stenciled on the side, was making its slow, prowling way along the shoreline. At the helm was Karen Dorsey, the HOA president. She had a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield and a pair of binoculars around her neck. Next to her stood Travis Klein, a big, soft guy who wore his security vest like it was a military uniform. They weren't looking at me, but at my boat. Travis raised a camera with a long lens and started taking pictures. Karen pointed toward the Sea Dragon and then made a note on her clipboard, her lips moving as she whispered something to Travis. They looked like two vultures circling something they'd decided was already dead. They weren't enforcing a rule, they were gathering evidence for a trial they had already decided the outcome of. I folded the notice, tucked it into my back pocket, and went inside. Panic gets you nowhere. My training taught me that. You assess the situation, you review the facts, and you follow procedure. So that's what I did. I pulled out my closing documents, found the addendum for the dock slip, and made a clean, clear copy. Then I picked up the phone and called the HOA management office. A woman with a tired voice answered. I explained who I was, my address, and the notice I'd just received. I kept my voice level and calm. There seems to be a mistake, I said. The dock slip is part of my property. I have the signed paperwork from the previous owner, grandfathering it in. I'd be happy to bring a copy to the office and clear this up. There was a long pause on the other end, just the sound of someone typing slowly with 2 fingers. Mr. Hollis, she said, her tone flat. The board has received a complaint about your vessel. A complaint? From whom? The squirrels? My only immediate neighbors were Jack Riley, a Vietnam vet who barely left his house, and a young family on the other side who used their place maybe 4 weekends a year. I understand that, I said, my patience starting to thin. But a complaint doesn't change a legally filed document. Can I schedule a time to meet with the board or the property manager to present my paperwork? More typing. Sir, the violation has been logged. We will review the file. And that was it. Not, we'll look at your documents. Not, let's set a meeting. Just, we'll review. It was the most polite, professionally worded go away I'd ever heard. I hung up the phone feeling a cold dread that had nothing to do with the morning chill. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. The next 2 days were quiet. Too quiet. I kept an eye out for Karen and her security patrol, but they were ghosts. The Sea Dragon sat in its slip, the water lapping gently against its hull, the 72-hour clock ticking down. I'd half expected to see a tow rope or another notice, but there was nothing. I started to wonder if maybe they had, in fact, reviewed the file and realized their error. Maybe reason had prevailed. That hope died around 9 o'clock on the second night. There was a soft knock on my back door, the one leading to the deck. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and saw my neighbor, Jack Riley, standing there, shoulders hunched against the dark. I opened the door. Jack was a man of few words, but his eyes told a story. Tonight, they looked worried. He didn't say hello. He just pushed a folded envelope into my hand. Figured you should see this, he grunted. Found it by the community printer. They forgot to shred it. His hand was rough and calloused, and he held my gaze for a second, a silent warning passing between us. Then he turned and disappeared, back into the night as quietly as he'd arrived. I closed the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I walked to the kitchen counter and unfolded the paper. It was a photocopy of an internal HOA email, a chain between Karen Dorsey and Ellen Ruiz, the treasurer. The subject line was, Hollis docking issue. Ellen had written, Legal says the grandfather clause is solid. We can't force a removal based on the current bylaws. The reply, from Karen, was sent just an hour later. It was short, and every word was laced with venom. I read it once, and then twice, letting the meaning sink in. It said, he thinks his paperwork will save him. It won't. We'll make him move it one way or another. One way or another. The words echoed in the silent house. This was never about a boat. It was never about a rule or a bylaw. The violation notice, the pictures, the dismissive phone call, it was all a sham. A performance designed to build a fake case against me. This was a personal vendetta, a targeted attack from a woman who had decided she didn't like me, my boat, or my refusal to be intimidated. As I stood there, the flimsy piece of paper in my hand felt as heavy as a block of iron. They weren't just trying to get me to move my boat, they were trying to break me. And I realized, with a clarity that was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice, that I had to stop thinking about this like a disagreement. This was a fight, and it was a fight they had just started. The 72-hour deadline came and went with a deafening silence. For 2 full days after I received Jack's warning, nothing happened. The HOA's pontoon boat was nowhere in sight, and no new notices appeared on my door. A small, foolish part of me started to hope that Karen had been bluffing, that her nasty email was just hot air. Maybe their lawyer had talked some sense into them. That hope was a fragile thing, and it shattered completely at 11:30 p.m. on the third night. The night was perfectly still, with no wind to stir the water and a bright moon that laid a silver path across the lake. I was in my workshop, tidying up, when a motion alert from my dock camera pinged on my phone. I'd set it up the week I moved in. A simple system, but effective. I pulled up the live feed, my stomach twisting into a cold knot. The HOA security pontoon was gliding toward my dock, its running lights off, moving like a shark through the dark water. I saw 2 figures, One was big and bulky Travis Klein. The other was smaller, more wiry, standing at the helm. Even in the grainy night vision, I recognized Karen Dorsey's stiff, commanding posture. They eased the boat right up next to the Sea Dragon. I felt my own breath catch in my chest as I watched, my mind racing. What were they doing? I watched Travis lean over, a knife glinting in the moonlight. With two quick, efficient motions, he sliced through the thick mooring lines that held my boat's stern to the dock cleats. The Sea Dragon, now only tethered by its bowline, drifted slightly, its rear swinging free. Then Travis did something that made my blood run cold. He leaned far over the edge, his arm disappearing below the waterline near the transom. As a Navy engineer, I knew instantly what he was doing. He was pulling the garboard drain plugs. They're simple brass plugs at the lowest point of the hull, designed to drain water when the boat is out of the water. When it's in the water, they are the one thing keeping the lake on the outside. Pulling those plugs is like opening a wound. Water would pour in, silent and fast, flooding the engine compartment first, the heaviest part of the boat. It wouldn't just drift away, it would sink from the stern down. It was a clean, quiet, and devastating act of sabotage. My mind screamed to run, to get out there, but I was frozen for a half second, captivated by the sheer audacity of what I was witnessing on a tiny phone screen. They pushed my boat away from the dock, a final shove to send it into the deeper water. Then their own boat's engine kicked to life with a low rumble, and they sped off into the darkness, leaving a churning wake behind them. That broke the spell. I dropped my phone on the workbench and bolted out the back door, sprinting down the slight grassy slope to the dock. The cool night air felt like ice on my face. By the time my bare feet hit the wooden planks, I could already see it. The Sea Dragon was listing badly to the stern. The water was already over the swim platform. No, 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 I muttered, my voice hoarse. I didn't even think. I jumped off the dock, the shock of the cold water taking my breath away. It was up to my waist, mud and muck sucking at my feet. I struggled toward the boat, my hands searching for the lines Travis had cut, for anything to hold on to. The stern was already sinking, the water dark and unforgiving. I could feel the pull as it filled with the weight of the lake. It was too late. The boat was too heavy, the ingress of water too fast. Within a minute that felt like an hour, the engine was fully submerged, and the rest of the hull tilted backward, slipping beneath the surface with a sickening, gurgling sound. All that was left was about 5 feet of the bow, pointing at the moon like a gravestone. I stood there, waist deep in the cold black water, staring at the ruin of something I had poured my heart into. My first call, dripping wet on the dock, was to the sheriff's department. I explained what happened, that I had it all on video, the names, the boat, the act itself. The dispatcher's voice was weary and detached. "Is anyone hurt, sir?" "No," I said, my teeth chattering. "But my boat, my property, has just been intentionally destroyed." There was a pause, and then the words that I would never forget. "Sir, this sounds like a civil matter with your HOA. We can't get involved in that." And then a soft click. He had hung up. The next morning, the sun rose on the same serene scene as before, but now it was a graveyard. The bow of the Sea Dragon poked out of the water, a monument to their crime. I called a local marine mechanic, a gruff old-timer named Dave, whose shop had been on the lake for 40 years. He came out that afternoon, took one look from the dock, and let out a low whistle. "Well, she's a submarine now," he said, not unkindly. He explained that raising it would require airbags and a barge. The saltwater-cooled engine would be seized solid, with fresh water and silt. The electronics, the wiring, the upholstery, all of it was a total loss. He scribbled some figures on a notepad. To get her up, strip her down, and assess the hull for damage before you even think about rebuilding, you're already looking at $90,000. Minimum. He handed me the paper and then looked me straight in the eye. His gaze was serious. "Mark," he said, his voice dropping lower, "boats don't just sink on a windless night. You need to document everything. Every call, every minute. Get pictures of it, from every angle, before you move it. This smells like pure sabotage." His words were the steel I needed. The shock was gone. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet fury. This wasn't just about a boat anymore. It was about bullies thinking they could operate outside the law. I walked back into my house, downloaded the night's security footage, and saved it to 3 separate hard drives. Then, I walked back out onto my dock, pulled out my phone, and began to record. I filmed the sunken bow, the empty slip, the quiet water that held my ruined property. Then I turned the camera on myself. My voice was calm, not a trace of the shaking rage I felt inside. "They wanted it gone," I said, looking directly into the lens. "Now it's gone under 6 feet of water, but I'm not done." The promise I made to myself on that dock, with the camera still recording, was a quiet one. Anger is a fire that burns out. Determination is a forge. You can't build a case with hot air. You need steel. So, the first week after the sinking was all about building that case. My small home office, which usually held schematics for old engines and blueprints for woodworking projects, became a command center. The first order of business was the video. I didn't just save the file. I treated it like a critical piece of naval intelligence. I pulled the memory card from the camera and made a direct, encrypted copy to my main computer. That was backup 1. Then, I transferred a second copy to a brand new external hard drive, which I labeled with a simple date and put in my fireproof safe. That was backup 2. For backup 3, I uploaded the encrypted file to a secure cloud server based in another country, a place with strict data privacy laws. If my house burned down and the safe melted, the proof would still exist. Then, I began the slow, meticulous work of pulling still images from the footage. I went through it frame by frame, isolating the clearest shots. There was Karen Dorsey at the helm of the pontoon, her face illuminated by the glow of the controls, looking not angry but smug. There was Travis Klein, his beefy shoulders hunched as he leaned over with the knife. The best shot was one where he looked up for a second, almost directly at the camera, his expression blank and empty as he prepared to pull the plugs. The moonlight gave the images a ghostly clarity. I printed each one in high resolution on photographic paper, then used a ruler and a fine-tipped pen to write the exact date and timestamp beneath each picture. It was a stack of evidence that felt solid and undeniable in my hands. But video alone wasn't enough. I needed to show a pattern. I needed to understand how they operated. Most people don't realize how much of an HOA's business is, by law, open to the homeowners. Their records, their meeting minutes, their inspection logs, it's all supposed to be available. I started with their online community portal. Tucked away in a section labeled Compliance Archives, I found what I was looking for: the official HOA property inspection logs. They were scanned as PDF documents, one for each month. I downloaded the past 6 months and began to read. It was a monument to lazy fraud. The first thing I noticed was the violation language. The entry for my boat, logged the day I received the notice, used the exact same wording verbatim as a violation for a misplaced garden hose 3 streets over, and a notice for an unapproved mailbox 2 months prior. It was a copy and paste job. They weren't writing violations. They were filling in templates. Then I looked at the signatures. The log required the inspecting officer to sign and date each entry. The signature on my violation, a messy scrawl attributed to Travis Klein, was a perfect pixel-for-pixel match to 4 other signatures on that same page, all for different properties on different days. It wasn't a signature. It was a digital stamp. They weren't even trying to hide it. This wasn't just about my boat. This was systemic. They were manufacturing a paper trail to justify whatever they wanted to do. This document was my new cornerstone. I printed every page, using a yellow highlighter to mark the forged signatures, and a red pen to circle the repeated boilerplate text. 2 days later, as I was organizing the files into a thick binder, Jack Riley knocked on my door again. He was holding a small cup of coffee and had a thoughtful look on his face. "Been thinking about that night," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "Couldn't sleep. I was sitting on my porch, facing the water. Around 11:30, maybe a little later, I saw the HOA pontoon drift by with its lights off." He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Thought it was strange. Then I saw it stop by your dock. I motioned for him to come in, but he shook his head, preferring to stand on the porch. I only saw one of them clearly for a second," he continued. "Big fella, wearing one of those vests they have, the one that says security on the back in big white letters. He was messing with the back of your boat for maybe a minute." Jack's eyes, clear and sharp, met mine. "I'm a witness, Mark. If you need one, I'll tell them what I saw." He wasn't dramatic about it. It was a simple statement of fact from a man who knew the difference between what's right and what's wrong. An eyewitness, a decorated veteran with zero reason to lie, corroborating my video. The case was getting stronger by the hour. I thanked him, and he just nodded, turned, and walked back to his own quiet porch. It was time to make the first move. I spent that afternoon drafting a letter. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't accusatory. It was a cold, hard demand letter. I identified myself and my property. I detailed the events of the sinking, referencing the exact time and date. I included the 90-0 preliminary damage estimate from the marine mechanic. I stated that I had in my possession irrefutable video evidence of the deliberate destruction of my property by 2 board-level members of the association, whom I named. I attached copies of the key, damning screenshots, Karen at the helm, Travis cutting the lines, Travis reaching for the plugs. I attached a copy of my dock slip paperwork, and I demanded full, immediate restitution for the value of the boat and all associated costs, setting a preliminary figure of 120 to cover salvage and legal fees. I sealed the thick envelope, drove to the post office, and sent it to the official HOA address via certified mail with a return receipt requested. They would have to sign for it. They could not pretend they didn't get it. For the rest of the day, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The ball was in their court, their move. The next morning, I found their answer. The certified letter, the one someone had to sign for, was lying on my front doormat. It had been ripped cleanly in half, right down the middle, the printed screenshots of Karen and Travis torn in 2. The 2 pieces were tucked neatly under the edge of the mat. It wasn't a response. It was a message. It said, "We got your proof, and we don't care." Finding my demand letter torn in half on my doormat wasn't a setback. It was a confirmation, an act of pure, unrestrained arrogance. They were so confident in their petty power that they felt they could literally tear up a legal demand and throw it back in my face. I didn't get angry. I got a pair of tweezers from my workshop, carefully picked up the 2 halves of the letter and the torn envelope, and sealed them in a clear evidence bag. I labeled it with the date and time I found it. It was another piece for the binder, another exhibit in the case I was building against them, brick by methodical brick. Their contempt was just another form of evidence. But I knew that video evidence of the sinking, while powerful, could still be argued by a slippery lawyer. They might claim it was a prank gone wrong, that they didn't understand the consequences. I needed to prove intent. I needed to make it impossible for them to claim ignorance. So, I made a call to a man I'd served with years ago, a retired Coast Guard officer named Art Donovan. Art had spent 35 years investigating marine accidents, everything from fishing trawlers to pleasure yachts. If anyone could explain the mechanics of a sinking in plain, simple English, it was him. We met at a small coffee shop halfway between our houses. I laid it all out for him. The video stills, the initial violation notice, the torn letter. He listened patiently, his brow furrowed, his fingers steepled in front of him. When I finished, he picked up the still image of Travis Klein, reaching down toward the transom. "The garboard drain plugs," he said, tapping the picture. "That's the ballgame, Mark." I asked him to explain it to me as if I were a jury of 12 people who had never seen a boat before. He leaned back. "It's simple," he said. "Those plugs are at the very lowest point of the hull for a reason. They have one job: let water out when the boat is on a trailer. They are not something that comes loose. You have to get a wrench, reach down under the water, and deliberately unscrew them. There is no other way for them to come out. Period. An engine can fail, a hose can burst, a boat can hit a log. Those are accidents. Pulling the plugs? That's a signed confession. It's the equivalent of siphoning the gas out of a car, and then claiming you don't know why it won't start." He said he would be willing to write an expert affidavit stating exactly that, under penalty of perjury. It was a huge piece of the puzzle, translating the visual proof into an undeniable statement of fact. Energized by Art's confirmation, I went back to digging. If they were this arrogant, they were also sloppy. And sloppy people leave a paper trail. My next target was the HOA's financials. I put in a formal request for the last 3 months of maintenance and vendor invoices. By law, they had to provide them. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived in my mailbox. I spread the contents out on my dining room table. It was mostly what I expected: landscaping contracts, pool cleaning services, insurance premiums. I went through them line by line, comparing dates and amounts, looking for anything out of the ordinary. And then, I found it. It was an invoice from a commercial diving and salvage company based 2 towns over. The invoice was for a service described as Emergency Watercraft Removal Retainer. The amount was for $2,500. It wasn't the service or the amount that made my hands go still. It was the date. The invoice was dated the day before the Sea Dragon sank. They had hired and paid a company to be on standby to pull my boat out of the lake before they had even sunk it. This was the premeditation. This was the conspiracy, laid out in black and white on a company letterhead. Karen, Ellen, and Travis hadn't just committed a crime of passion. They had planned it, budgeted for it, and put a salvage team on retainer to clean up their mess. I carefully placed the invoice in a protective sleeve. This was the document that could send them to jail. In the midst of building my case, a small but significant victory came from an unexpected place. My boat insurance adjuster called. He was a young, sharp guy who had seen the video, read my statement, and reviewed the mechanic's estimate. "Mr. Hollis," he said, his voice crisp and professional, "this is as clear-cut as it gets. This wasn't an act of God. We're classifying this as intentional damage and vandalism under the terms of your policy. We're cutting you a check for the full replacement value covered, which is $50,000. It's being sent out today. It wasn't the full $90,000, but it was a start. More importantly, it was an official, third-party validation from an insurance company that a crime had been committed. It was another brick in the wall I was building. But the HOA wasn't going to let me have even a small win without a fight. The very next day, I found 3 new violation notices stuck to my front door, flapping in the breeze. They were, if possible, even more ridiculous than the first one. One claimed my back fence was half an inch taller than the 6-foot maximum allowed by the bylaws. Another stated that the black paint on my mailbox was a non-approved shade of semi-gloss instead of matte. The third, and most absurd, cited me for improper flag display, claiming the American flag I flew from a pole on my porch was 2 inches too close to a gutter. It was harassment, plain and simple. It was their way of trying to bleed me dry with petty fines while they ignored the felony they'd committed. That evening, the final piece of the chapter fell into place. I logged into the official community web forum, a place usually filled with complaints about dog barking and ads for bake sales. There was a new post at the top of the page, written by Karen Dorsey herself. It wasn't an official HOA announcement. It was personal, posted under her own name for the whole community to see. The post was a rambling defense of maintaining community standards and a warning against disruptive individuals who refuse to follow the rules. But it was the last sentence that was clearly meant for me. It read, "Some people think they can play games and intimidate this board. He's going to regret playing games." There it was, a public threat. In her mind, I was the one playing games. In her mind, she was the victim. And she was promising, in front of everyone, that she was coming for me again. The question was, what would she try next? Karen's threat on the community forum was a declaration of war. She wasn't just coming after me. She was telling the entire neighborhood that she was untouchable. An amateur would have responded to that post, getting into a public shouting match. But I knew that was her territory. She wanted a messy, emotional fight where the facts got lost in the noise. My territory was quiet, methodical, and based on fact. Her threat showed me I had to move beyond proving the crime and start dismantling the machine that allowed her to commit it. That machine was the HOA itself. And every machine has a critical point of failure. For a business, which is all an HOA really is, that point is almost always its insurance. I spent an entire afternoon making public records requests, not for more invoices, but for the HOA's master insurance policy and all related certificates. It took 3 days to get the documents, and I read every line of the dense, jargon-filled text. Deep within a section on liability coverage, I found the vulnerability I was looking for. The policy covered negligence, accidents, and errors, but it contained an exclusion clause for deliberate acts of destruction, fraud, or criminal conduct undertaken by board members or their appointed agents. The policy was also up for its annual renewal in less than a month. It hit me like a ton of bricks. If their own insurance carrier found out that the president and her enforcer had intentionally destroyed a homeowner's property, a crime that my evidence was leading toward felony status, the carrier would have grounds to void their current coverage immediately and refuse to renew their policy. Without insurance, the entire HOA would be insolvent overnight. No bank would finance a home purchase in the community. The whole house of cards would collapse. This was no longer just about getting my $90,000 back. I now had the leverage to take everything from them. Proving the act was one thing. Proving the coordination was the next. I knew Karen, Travis, and Ellen had planned this. But the salvage invoice was the only hard link. I needed something more, something that showed their state of mind, their contempt for me and the law. The break came from the most unexpected place. A woman who lived on the other side of the lake, whom I only knew to nod at, called me. She sounded nervous. She said one of the HOA's seasonal maintenance kids, a high schooler who cut the grass at the common areas, had been shown a video by Travis Klein. Travis, in a moment of sheer stupidity and hubris, had been bragging to the kid about how he'd handled a problem boat. The kid was uncomfortable and showed it to his dad, who then told his wife, who was the woman on the phone with me. She said the kid had made a copy of the video from Travis's phone when he wasn't looking. She asked me if I wanted it. An hour later, a small USB drive was in my mailbox. The video file was only 15 seconds long. The footage was shaky, clearly filmed on a phone. It showed the dark water of the lake, and you could hear the low thrum of the pontoon's engine. A voice, clearly Travis Klein's, said with a chuckle, "There she goes." The camera then panned over to the boat's wake, a foamy trail in the moonlight. Then you hear another voice, unmistakably Karen Dorsey's, sharp and cutting from off camera. She says, Gravity is undefeated, Travis. Now let's go. Travis then flipped the camera around, grinning like a fool into his own phone. Mission accomplished, he boasted. I watched it 5 times. It was a video of them celebrating. It was their victory lap, recorded for posterity. I saved it in 3 different secure locations. The premeditated invoice, the act itself on my security camera, and now a video of them gloating. The case was hermetically sealed. With the affidavit from my Coast Guard friend, the premeditated invoice for the salvage crew, and now the new video of them celebrating, I decided it was time to revisit the sheriff's department. I didn't call the front desk this time. I called and asked for the detective in charge of property crimes. I got his voicemail, left a calm, detailed message outlining the new evidence I had, and mentioned the specific dollar value of the damage. To my surprise, Detective Miller called me back within the hour. I walked him through the timeline and the evidence I now possessed, piece by piece. I emailed him the key files while we were on the phone. There was a long silence on his end as he reviewed them. Mr. Hollis, he said finally, his voice now serious and grim, this is no longer a civil matter. With the damage exceeding $25,000 and this new evidence showing clear premeditation and intent, we are officially reopening this as a felony investigation for criminal destruction of property. It was the first time I felt a glimmer of real victory, a sign that the system I trusted might actually work. The feeling didn't last long. The HOA must have gotten wind of the reopened investigation because exactly 4 days later, the real counterattack came. It wasn't a ripped-up letter or a nasty forum post. It was a thick, creamy envelope delivered by a courier. It was from a law firm in the city, the kind with 20 partners listed on the letterhead in gold leaf. The letter was brutally simple. It stated that due to my failure to pay the outstanding fines for the fence, the mailbox, and the flag, totaling a ludicrous $750, the HOA board had voted to place a lien on my property. And then the final blow, the letter served as my official notice. If the fines were not paid in full within 10 business days, their firm was instructed to initiate foreclosure proceedings on my home. My home. They were going to try to take my house because of a mailbox painted the wrong shade of black, all to cover for the felony they had committed. The audacity was breathtaking. All my evidence, all my careful documentation, none of it would matter if they could legally seize my property out from under me. They had started a timer. 10 days. 10 days to ruin them, or I would lose everything. I walked into my kitchen, took a black marker, and wrote a large number 10 on a piece of paper. I taped it to my refrigerator door. Each morning, I would change the number. It was a countdown clock, a stark, daily reminder of the stakes. This was it. The final, winner-take-all battle had begun. The foreclosure notice was not a threat. It was a weapon. They had moved past petty harassment and were now aiming a legal cannon directly at my life savings and my home. The number 10 I wrote on my fridge was a stark reminder that a defensive strategy was no longer enough. I couldn't just keep building a case and wait for the system to work. I had to force the system's hand. I had to create a single moment so undeniable that everyone, the law, the insurers, the public, would be forced to look and act at the same time. The next 8 days were a blur of focused, relentless work. I took the binder of evidence, which was now nearly 5 inches thick, and broke it down into 4 identical, overwhelming packages of proof. Each one was a story in itself, meticulously organized with a table of contents, tabbed sections, and a clear, 1-page summary cover letter. Package 1 was for the HOA's liability insurance carrier. Its cover letter highlighted their policy's fraud exclusion clause and attached the video of the sinking, the expert affidavit from Art Donovan proving intent, the invoice for the salvage team dated before the crime, and the celebratory video from Travis's phone. It was a simple, brutal message. Your clients have committed a felony. They have voided their policy, and you are on notice. Package 2 was for the county prosecutor's office, addressed directly to Detective Miller. It was the thickest of the 4, containing everything: the forged inspection logs, witness testimony from Jack Riley, the torn-up demand letter, the public threat on the forum, and every single piece of video and financial evidence. It was an entire criminal investigation, gift-wrapped and ready for prosecution. Package 3 went to the State Attorney General's office, with a cover letter focused on consumer protection and fraudulent business practices, highlighting the systemic nature of the fake violations and illegal foreclosure threats, not just against me, but likely against others. Finally, Package 4. This one was different. It went to the top investigative reporter at the biggest local news station in the city. The kind of journalist who smelled blood in the water and won awards for it. This package was all about the story. A retired Navy veteran being bullied, his prized boat sunk in the night, and a powerful HOA president caught on camera orchestrating the crime. I included the best visual evidence, the clear stills from the security footage, and most importantly, a high-quality audio file of Karen's voice from that footage. The last thing I put in that package was a copy of the foreclosure letter, showing the ticking clock at 9 a.m. On the 8th day, with the number 2 now on my fridge, I drove to the FedEx office and sent all 4 packages via overnight delivery. The coordinated strike was launched. The explosion came faster than I could have imagined. That very next evening, I was sitting in my living room when the local news lead-in came on. Up next, the anchor said with a serious expression, "We have an exclusive investigation. Justice on the lake. Is your HOA protecting you or preying on you?" What one homeowner uncovered could put his entire neighborhood association behind bars. My heart hammered in my chest. I turned up the volume. The reporter, Sarah Jensen, laid out the story with chilling precision. They showed aerial shots of my sunken boat. They showed the initial violation notice. They showed the forged inspection logs with the copied and pasted signatures highlighted in yellow, just as I had done. And then came the moment that changed everything. The screen went dark, and a simple caption appeared, audio from homeowner's security camera. Then, they played it. Karen Dorsey's voice, crisp and clear in the night air, filled my living room. "Cut the lines," she commanded. "No one will know." The silence that followed was more powerful than any sound. It was the sound of a villain being unmasked in front of 50,000 viewers. My phone started ringing almost immediately. It didn't stop for 3 days. It was my neighbors. One after another, they called, their voices a mixture of shock and empowerment. An elderly woman on the next street told me she'd been fined hundreds of dollars because her bird feeder was attracting non-native sparrows. A young father told me he'd been threatened with a lien for having a child's plastic slide in his backyard. The stories poured in, a torrent of suppressed frustration finally released. They had all been afraid to speak up, to be the next target. My fight, now broadcast on the 6 o'clock news, had given them courage. They started forwarding me their own evidence, bogus fines, harassing emails, stories of Travis Klein patrolling their yards with a flashlight late at night. The community was no longer a place of silent victims. It had become an army of witnesses. The HOA board panicked. 2 days after the news report, a hastily printed notice was taped to the community mailbox kiosk. Emergency closed meeting of the board of directors. Closed, of course. They were roaches scurrying from the light. Jack Riley called me that evening. "Place is a ghost town," he said. "Heard that Ellen, the treasurer, already packed a bag and left. Rumor is she's cooperating with the DA." A grim smile spread across my face. The internal collapse had begun. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace, a feeling of stability. The countdown clock on my fridge read 1. My plan had worked. Justice was no longer a hope. It felt like an inevitability. I slept soundly that night, the first restful sleep I'd had in over a month. But the peace was a fragile illusion. The next morning, I walked outside to go to the store, and stopped dead in my tracks. My truck, my reliable Ford F-150, was sitting on 4 flat tires. All of them had been slashed, the rubber gaping open in long, deliberate cuts. And scrawled across my garage door in huge, dripping letters of red spray paint was a message of 2 words, a message that turned my blood to ice. It said, "Sink next?" They were done with letters and lawyers. They had lost control, and now they were making it clear what their final move would be. The red spray paint seemed to glow in the morning light, each dripping letter a personal violation that went deeper than any sunken boat. Sink next? It wasn't a question, it was a promise. I stood there for a long time, the smell of paint and slashed rubber thick in the air, my meticulously constructed case of evidence feeling suddenly fragile and naive. I had used logic, documents, and the law. They had responded with crude violence, a language of pure intimidation. For the first time in this entire ordeal, a cold wave of doubt washed over me. I walked around the side of the house, past the defaced garage, and down to the dock. I sat on the edge, my feet dangling over the water, and stared at the empty slip. The bow of the Sea Dragon had been salvaged a week ago, leaving behind nothing but a dark patch of water. I had followed every rule, every procedure I had been taught my whole life. I had built a case so airtight it was a fortress. But what good is a fortress if your enemy is willing to burn down the entire village around you? Was it worth it? The endless hours, the constant vigilance, the risk to my own safety, to my home. In that quiet, lonely moment, staring at the space where my boat should have been, I honestly wasn't sure. That afternoon, as I was scrubbing the first of the red paint off my garage door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I answered, expecting another reporter or a curious neighbor. "Mr. Hollis? This is Chief Dana Porter with the County Prosecutor's Office." Her voice was calm, professional, and carried an authority that cut through the fog of my doubt. "I wanted to inform you personally that based on the comprehensive evidence you provided, and our own subsequent investigation, my office is filing a 14-count criminal indictment this afternoon." I leaned against the garage wall for support, the scrub brush falling from my hand. She continued, her voice steady and clear. "The charges are against Karen Dorsey, Travis Klein, and Ellen Ruiz. They include felony criminal destruction of property, conspiracy, multiple counts of insurance fraud, and witness intimidation. Witness intimidation. The spray paint. The slashed tires. They had made one last, desperate mistake. They had escalated their crime on the very day the hammer was set to fall. "We'll be executing the arrest warrants within the hour, Mr. Hollis," she said. "Thank you for your service to your country, and thank you for your courage in seeing this through." I didn't have to wait for the evening news. About an hour later, I saw them, 2 county sheriff's patrol cars, rolling slowly and deliberately down our quiet street, their lights off. They didn't come to my house. They pulled into the driveway of Karen Dorsey's immaculate, oversized colonial home 3 doors down. I watched from my front window as neighbors slowly began to emerge onto their porches, drawn by the silent, official presence. Detective Miller got out of the first car, along with 2 uniformed deputies. They walked up the cobblestone path to her front door. Karen opened it, a cordless phone to her ear, an expression of annoyance on her face as if she were about to scold a landscaper. I saw Detective Miller speak to her, showing her the warrant. Her face went through a rapid series of changes. First confusion, then indignant rage, then pale, slack-jawed shock. This wasn't how her world worked. This wasn't a civil notice she could tear up, or a homeowner she could bully. This was real. We could hear her voice rising, shrill and panicked. "This is ridiculous! I am the president of the board. This is harassment. The deputies were unfazed. As one of them calmly instructed her to turn around, the local news van I'd sent my package to pulled up at the end of the street, its camera already rolling. The deputy took her hands and placed them behind her back. The sharp, distinct click of the handcuffs closing echoed across the quiet street. It was the sound of her power evaporating into the afternoon air. They put her in the back of the patrol car, still yelling about her rights, about how this was all a misunderstanding. But no one was listening anymore. Travis Klein's arrest, I later heard, was even simpler. They found him at the community pool, adjusting the chlorine levels, and he surrendered without a word, his security vest seeming less like a uniform and more like a costume. The criminal trial was swift. With the videos, the financial records, and now Ellen Ruiz testifying for the prosecution in exchange for a lighter sentence, it was an open and shut case. But the real justice, the justice for the whole community, came from the civil judgment. My case became the lead in a class action lawsuit filed on behalf of 72 other homeowners who had been victims of the board's extortion and harassment scheme. The evidence of systemic fraud was so overwhelming that the HOA's insurance policy was declared void, just as I had predicted. The judgment came down like thunder. The court awarded the homeowners a total of $24 million in compensatory and punitive damages. The HOA was declared bankrupt and ordered to be dissolved, its assets, the clubhouse, the pool, the pontoon boat to be sold off to help pay the settlement. Every fraudulent fine was to be repaid with interest. Every illegal lien was removed. It was a complete and total victory, not just for me, but for everyone. Last week, a new boat arrived on a trailer. It's a 22-foot runabout, almost identical to the Sea Dragon, just a little newer. I spent the weekend getting it settled in its slip. The same slip that started this whole war. The sun was setting this evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I was sitting on the deck with a cold drink, watching the light dance on the water. My new American flag, the properly sized one, fluttered in the gentle breeze from its pole on the porch. Everything looked almost exactly the same as it did on that first morning when I found the notice on my windshield. But nothing was the same. The quiet was different now. It wasn't the tentative quiet of waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was a deep, earned peace. The kind of peace that only comes after a storm. They had taken my boat, threatened my home, and tried to break my spirit. But they forgot one simple fundamental truth. You can drain a hull, but you can't drain the truth.